Designing a niche game can be a gamble that pays off in a huge way. You get to build a community around something unique, different, and loved by a group of people who get to share in an experience. This week on Scheduled for Launch, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk with James Kerr about his game, Fight to Survive, a tabletop role-playing game where martial arts meets heart. In this slickly designed system, take inspiration from your favorite martial arts films and take on the world. We talk about heart, diceless systems, and making stakes that matter to your character. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover the projects that you may have missed. This week, I am incredibly excited to be talking with James Kerr about a really cool martial arts tabletop role-playing game called Fight to Survive. James, thank you so much for joining me on the show this week.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Zach. It's wonderful to be here. I feel right at home.
It's one of those things. It's not too often I get to talk with other Canadian creators, so I'm very excited, especially because you're really not that far off from where I am either. So
yeah, I'm in Aurelia. For those of you keeping track in the tabletop role-playing game Home Game, it is the birthplace of Robin D. Laws.
Oh.
I'm about a stone's throw away from the house of Ed Greenwood and a fair but not insubstantial drive from you in Niagara Falls.
Enough of a difference where it would be a day trip.
Yeah, it becomes a day trip at that point. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's fine. People make day trips a lot for better, for worse things. But...
Yeah, I'm really excited to be talking to you about Fight to Survive because it's got a lot of stuff that I really like going on. Martial arts. I think what was the slogan? It was
slogan, you probably is role playing martial arts meets heart.
Yes, I love it. It's such a good tagline.
Well, it was born out of I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump right in, but it was born out of kind of intense dissatisfaction with the way that martial arts are depicted in most other tabletop role playing games, right? And I really wanted to be able to do it in a way that would feel meaningful, because there are lots of games out there where you can have a character and you can beat up another character, right? Without there are kind of 2-player fighting game type tabletop role playing games, most of them anime themed, and and people can have their own fun. I don't that's great, awesome, you filmed that, awesome. But what I wanted was something where the fights matter more than that. So it's just as much about why you're getting into a fight, what's going on, and what the stakes are, and making sure there are nice clear stakes and nice clear motivations for the things that are happening, so that it feels meaningful. So it's not just a great big jump kick in the air and wow, what a jump kick. It's feeding into the emotional capacity of why these things are going on. So it's martial arts meets heart.
It's, from what I can tell, there is a lot of that going on too, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But before we do, James, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm well, how I usually put it is I'm a publisher by day. I'm a trade magazine publisher by day, and I've been doing that for probably 7 years, and I've been in the tabletop role-playing game industry for about 4 years.
Okay.
Sometimes as my only means of employment, but right now I have a day job, and I get to do it at night. So most of my work has been for Pendelhaven Press, which is out of Montreal. They do the Fate of the Norns Viking system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I did a few books for them, 6 books or something. And the last book I did for them was their Children of Eru. I shouldn't say I did for them. I was, part of a whole team. I did get to be, the project manager and the editor, and I did do quite a bit of development on it, and got to spearhead the thing and lead the Kickstarter. So, and it was a core book, it was a big deal book. It's the Celtic core book for the system. And so I did that, and I thought, well, I've got a backlog of my own systems I could be putting out, because publishing is no stranger to me, and I've done this a few times now. So after, I think it was 6 books, some of them were adventures, some of them were this, that, or everything else. I decided to strike out on my own as Radio James Games and do my own Kickstarter. And this is the one I started with. I started on hard mode with a weird niche product about mundane martial arts in the 20th century called Fight to Survive, role-playing martial arts meets heart. That's how I got here.
And that's one of the exciting things too. So we know that it's a role-playing game where martial arts meets heart, but what is Fight to Survive? What can people expect to see in this game?
Well, how do we characterize it? Okay, let's get some of the hurdles out of the way because it's pretty weird. Number one is it's diceless. And some
Okay.
people listen to that and are like, "Ooh, diceless. Ew, is it even a role-playing game? Oh, magical tea party, blah." But I'd like to preface and say that it's diceless, but it's substantial, and things are substantiated because I think a lot of diceless games get the rap of being arbitrary, of their mechanics being
Hmm.
arbitrary, providing too open of a field, perhaps, and then not supporting the players in terms of their design to feel like their choices are clear and meaningful. Because choice paralysis is real. It's a real thing. If you just throw open people to anything, they don't know what to do. So what I wanted to do with this was we're working within a pretty strict sense of genre convention, which are martial arts movies. We can be a little more broad than that, but typically speaking, we're talking about martial arts movies.
Yeah.
So there's only so many choices within martial arts. I'm pretty adamant of the development perspective that if it is not mechanically reinforced, it does not exist. Because you could do anything in any game, sure, but certain play values, certain incentives lead you in certain directions in terms of play. So I wanted to make sure I was leading people in certain directions in terms of play. So is it diceless? Yes, it's diceless because it doesn't need the dice. But that doesn't mean it's insubstantial. It's probably rules medium in terms of crunch, and a lot of that is just the fact that getting used to the fact that it thinks very differently. So, how does this shake down? Well, fights are resolved by move trumping move in a kind of rock, paper, scissors structure. Every character has 5 moves: grapple, punch, kick, block, and footwork, and they have a relationship to each other that's on the character sheet. So, you know that kick beats punch, for instance, but what else beats punch is block, because block will stop a punch, etc., etc. So, when you're getting into a round of combat, you prep a few moves, usually 3, as the ones that you're going to have, and then Zach, you as my opponent are going to prep a few moves, and then I'll throw one out. I'll say I'm going to punch him, and then you'll respond with I'm going to kick in response, and I'll be like, oh crap, that kick beats my punch. I'm going to get kicked if I don't come up with something else. And then I look at the moves I have remaining and hope I have something that's going to beat kick, and then we go back and forth until someone runs out of moves and gets hit. So it's very quick, it's very fast, but it had kind of 2 design considerations. One was I don't know how much of a system junkie you are, Zach, but like one was there are martial arts games out there that
Hmm.
go into incredible detail about martial arts. Like Eric Wujik's Ninjas and Super Spies is a really good example. But you kind of feel like you have to know martial arts or get a PhD in order to be able to properly use that. And then the other side of things is martial arts mechanics. Like I'm gonna point to the big elephant in the room of Dungeons and Dragons to say that the martial arts aspect of it is so heavily abstracted that it just feels like a collection of superpowers. It doesn't really have a big relationship to martial arts. Like your
Yeah.
unarmed combat is just what you're having instead of a short sword. So I wanted it to feel like fighting because I have a history of fighting. I have a history in the martial arts, and I wanted it to feel like it was you were making meaningful choices within a combat to make it feel realistic. Now you can't make something realistic, but you can chase verisimilitude. And there's
Hmm.
certainly compromises that you make in terms of like the Venn diagram of realistic and of intuitive. Because the other consideration is I didn't want people to feel like they had to know martial arts in order to play a martial arts game. I want you to be able to make meaningful choices even without that. But I do want people to get a depth of understanding. Perhaps if they do have a background in the martial arts, they'll understand things, why I made some of the choices I made design wise, a little bit more intuitively. That's the fighting structure, and that's how it gets away with being diceless, is because you're making these choices, you're choosing these moves in the moment. And then the heart structure, the rest of the conflict resolution, is done dicelessly by comparison of numbers. I could just keep going on. Do you want me to just keep going on, or
No, yeah, please keep going on. So what's exciting me about this too is that like I was wondering how it might scratch that martial artist itch for me because a little known fact that some people might not know here is that I used to be a practitioner of Muay Thai, and actually a really bad injury is part of the reason why I got into tabletop role-playing games. So there's this like very distinct connection for martial arts and tabletop games to me. So yeah, like this is really incredibly fascinating to me.
Yeah, Muay Thai is great. It's one of the it's one of the most effective in-ring martial arts in the world.
Yes, it
So
is.
it's really and it's an exciting one to bring into a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
I can't promise that you'll be able to be as acrobatic as Tony Jaa because I think that defies reality itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, but I mean, Muay Thai is certainly in the game. I started off the game because I'm trying to make it approachable as well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have 5 basic martial arts in the game that are available to you, which is boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, karate, and kung fu. Now, that's just on the surface level. There are 50 other martial arts in there
Jeez.
for anybody who wants to take a little deeper of a dive. I just didn't want people feeling like, because okay, there's 2 kinds of people, right? The people who are going to be interested in this, and one of them is going to be like, oh, I don't really know what's going on, but I'll pick one of these 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other part, the rest of everyone who's like is going to be like, do they have this obscure martial art that I know, right? Like so they're going to go down the list and be like goju ryu karate, but I don't know, there's no empty-handed okinawan te, so but I felt like there was a point of diminishing returns including more than 50. uh, so that's the martial arts side of it is there, and then the heart is the other side of it.
Yeah.
Every character has a scale on them, uh, like a bar, that series of check boxes that fill up. And there's one for health, which role players are generally familiar with. If the one for
Mm.
health exceeds, then you're dead or you're whatever else. But there's also one for hardship, which is a statement of all of the emotional and physical stress that you have to go through. So if your dog gets hit by a car, you get a hardship. If you lose your job, you get a hardship. If you et cetera, et cetera. You have to go outside when it's raining really hard, you get a hardship, whatever. If that fills up and exceeds, then you're also out of the game, just as much as with health. You're like, you lose the will to fight, you don't want to participate in this violent lifestyle anymore, and you quit. So what keeps that hardship from filling up and eliminating you from the game? Well, what keeps that from happening is each character has comforts, people, places, and things that are significant to them. And mechanically, those comforts have a numerical value that when you employ those comforts, when you go and spend time with those comforts, it lessens your hardship score. So I might have a girlfriend, Cindy. I might have a location of like a 50s neon chrome colored diner, and I might have a thing like I don't know, a pocket watch that I inherited from my grandfather. And so my hardship's getting really high. I'm starting to freak out. Like I'm not acting the way I want to, as because my hardship is so high. So I go and visit my girlfriend Cindy, and I'm like, maybe we go to the movies or something. And I've got a 3 in Cindy, so Cindy lowers my hardship by 3, and then I can get back into the fights, so to speak. Because getting into fights is both physically dangerous and emotionally stressful. So
Yeah.
the violent aspect of it has to be counterbalanced by you dealing with your life. Now, here's the real kicker. It's easy to run because I'm lazy as a GM. I'm a forever GM, but I'm fairly lazy. And I want it to be easy to run. Every game is characterized by the GM taking one of those comforts and putting it under threat. So you choose your comforts based knowing that they're going to go on the chopping block. So if Cindy is your person, she's going to get kidnapped. I'm sorry. If the
Yeah.
diner is your thing, somebody's going to try and trash that diner. If the pocket watch, somebody just pickpocketed the pocket watch, whatever it is. So the year starts off with a comfort under threat. Cindy's been kidnapped. What are you going to do about it? So you took some hardship just for Cindy being kidnapped. If you don't get her back, you're going to take a whole lot of hardship and you're really going to suffer for it. So your comforts are both what's saving you and what's dragging you into this violent lifestyle that you don't necessarily want to pursue. So it's that tension, the tension between violence and how horrible violence is, and the glory of having to pursue this violent acts that give it meaning. Yeah. So you're fighting for things.
It's kind of like that through line of the 20th century martial arts films, or like the old NES games with like Double Dragon, Enter the Dragon. That's
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the one I've been touting a lot is there's a few cinematic influences that were really big in this. My one story that I keep going back to is I was watching Bloodsport, like Jean-Claude Van Damme, 1988,
Yeah.
And there was a scene where he was on the bus in Hong Kong, and Stan Bush is playing a song in the background, and he's looking troubled, our Frank Dukes, played by JCVD, and he stares into a window and he sees the reflection of Chong Li, his enemy. And then when he stares across the bus, Chong Li isn't there because he's troubled. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, like, damn, like, this is better than people give it credit for. I love it, and I wish there was a way to mechanically reinforce that in a role-playing game and make that relevant. So that was kind of the quest, was to make the heart of a martial arts movie uh, appealing on a mechanical perspective, so that you have incentive to lean into those dramatic moments and exciting moments. Bloodsport's a really good example, actually, because Chong Li, like when he beats up Jackson, steals his bandana, so he steals his comfort, and then Jean-Claude Van Damme has to fight to get the comfort back that's under threat, and it works out mechanically in terms of the game too. So, yeah.
That's really cool. One of the things that I think is really interesting about Fight to Survive is specifically this entanglement that you have with intergenerational violence and multi generations.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever played Greg Stafford's King Arthur Pendragon, but
I've heard about it.
I shamelessly lifted the kind of idea of it, not the mechanics of it, obviously, but the idea of it from him. There are other games that do multi-generational aspects, like Legacy is probably the
Hmm.
most well-known one, Life Among the Ruins, and it's kind of offshoots. But where it's coming from, and sometimes people can not understand why this is a good thing when they just hear it, but they need to play it. Every game session is typically 1 to 3 years or so. And the idea is that only you get blips of what's happening in someone's life as you're passing through that life. And you spend more and more time filling in those details in a way that isn't forced, right? In a way that isn't open
Yeah.
ended, like blank page. Like, I'm not, I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody's fun, good time. I am not particularly fond of story games because I always feel like they lack personal stakes. As soon as I'm put in charge of a narrative, I care less about my character. I care less about my character's perspective. Not everybody feels that way, but that's
Yeah.
how I feel
That's
about
fair.
things. So I wanted to try and keep the action grounded in your own kind of selfish, insular sense of decisions. So you're not responsible for a larger narrative beyond the way you would in I guess, any role playing game where you're expected to describe your apartment or something.
Yeah.
So the idea is that getting to adventure, so to speak, only briefly, and having these encounters, which could be minor or they could be major, they could be life changing or they could be completely mundane, and just involve some violence because they usually do. Uh, and then you get to move on. And as your character ages, they don't take the hits as well. Those harm boxes for health and those hardship boxes start disappearing. You just have fewer of them as you age. So it becomes harder to take those hits. You're like, yeah, you're getting better and better at throwing out those punches and kicks, but like your body just can't take it anymore in the same way. And the way health works, you might have something linger in one of your checkboxes for potentially years, like unhealed. So you're like, oh, I got into a fight, in 52 in that drunken brawl in the bar, and the guy who threw me against the wall, my shoulder just never healed properly, and et cetera, et cetera. Because, those things happen. Like that
Yep.
happens. Um, and so that's baked into the game, that notion that something can just stay with you. And there could come a point at which the character, you just want to, you think the character's time has passed and you're like, it's time for them to retire, or they go out in a blaze of glory. You need to come up with another character. But because you've got these comforts, because you've got these relationships, it's easy to form like relationships with NPCs are one of the biggest parts of the game, with this sense of place that you have. Especially, and I didn't mention this earlier, your comforts are shared between player characters. That's what binds them. That's why, like, Zach, you might be from our karate dojo. I might be like an underground boxer or something. But what do we have? Well, Cindy's my girlfriend, but Cindy is your sister. Or we both go to the same diner. Or we have identical pocket watches. Why? Is there a mystery? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, however you can connect them, they connect, and we bond over those things. And as you get more and more years, those things change and grow. And, it might turn out that Cindy and I have children. And then like I've been been progressing through the game for 10 years or something, or 20 years, and it might be time for me to hang up my hat and pass along the mantle of a martial lineage to my child or to my students in general if I've opened up a school, or et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't want this game to be a one-off, and a lot of niche games, like a lot of smaller indie role-playing games, are really only built for one-off sessions.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make something that was rich for long-term play without falling into the rat race of your numbers on the sheet climbing, but also the difficulty that you're supposed to be hitting climbing along with those numbers, because that doesn't actually improve you in
Yeah.
any way. It's just a rat race. So how do we make your progress feel meaningful as a character, and a way that you can play over a long period of time without diluting the content, so to speak?
Mhm.
And how it works for this is, because you're interacting with these comforts all the time, they're falling under threat. Riva's diner is being attacked by thugs, or it burned down in 72, or whatever else. You get a history, you get a long history with these people and these places and these things that's intertwined between the different player characters, and you end up like choosing really meaningful successors to those lineages, and building this tapestry of the martial world in this city that captures all the action, and it gets richer and richer the more you play. And you get to the point where you're like, well, guys, we've done everything we can, but like, I really want to know what happens to the next generation. Like, what happens as if we keep going? Like, as a GM, it's a wonder for me, because I just get to find out what happens. Like, I just have to pull the trigger on one. Oh, buddy, your cat ran away. Like, one comfort has to go under threat, and then I kind of like try to threaten everybody else's comforts as it comes up, and then they just they deal with their struggles, and they try to solve them, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it's always an adventure. So I'm getting a little bit off track, but the point is, the multi-generational play is at the heart of it, because it gives it a richness, it gives it a tapestry. I don't know if you've seen Cobra Kai, but
Yeah.
the TV show Cobra Kai is a really good example of multi-generational martial lineage, because you've got your Mr. Miyagi's and your John Kreese's and your Terry Silvers in one generation, and then you've got your Daniel LaRusso's and your Johnny Lawrence's in the next generation, and then you've got your Miguel's and Robbie's and Samantha's and et cetera, in the generation after that. And the game
Mhm.
can play out an awful lot like that. Well, just like when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you can often start off a group being like, we're going to be like Lord of the Rings, and you end up like Holy Grail. uh, Similar to that is, sometimes people will start the game and be like, we're going to be like Bloodsport, and end up like Miami Connection. And that's fine too. That's fine too. Or Ninja 3: The Domination. you know like, people have their own way of structuring the fun of it, and that's great. But it ends up like in the middling kind of goal. It ends up being a lot like Cobra Kai, where your characters are mixed together, and there's lots of motivations, and bad blood and good blood and old loyalties, and multi-generational aspects, and people are betraying each other. It's not necessarily a very PvP game. It does happen, but
Mhm.
it is, it can be there as much as the players want to lean into it, because it's a very player directed experience.
And this is kind of how you design it to avoid being a power fantasy and more of a grounded personal story then.
Yeah, God, it doesn't work as a power fantasy at all, because well, I even had a playtester like scratch his head after like 10 weeks or something and be like, this isn't a power fantasy at all. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, buddy. Like, it's because none of those martial arts movies really are. They're about misery, and they're about things being hard, and you triumphing regardless, right? Like, you
Mhm.
overcoming how like terrible your enemy is, or you're overcoming your physical limitations, or you're overcoming your whatever else. I'm a huge fan of the 70s Shaw Brothers kung fu movies, and I could go down that whole rabbit hole, but like the American kung fu films, or the American martial arts films of the probably mid 70s to mid 90s, are kind of the spiritual successor in some ways of those films,
Yeah.
and they're best represented here. I could do a whole book just on Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest, but they're united in their thematic sense of like, no, things are really hard. Like, things are really, really hard. Uh, the world is very difficult, and it's not going to be easy on you. And it does feel kind of punishing sometimes, but it means that those moments where you get to put your head above water, and you get to be victorious, and maybe you get to win, like, those are the moments you live for, right? They're just not going to come all the time. So it's not a power fantasy because humans are frail. In this
Yeah.
context, that's not always fun to play. In some games, you want that power fantasy, right? But in this particular case, in this game, humans are frail. They're not as squishy as like Morkborg, but they're frail, and and you take on like emotion matters. You take on hardship based on how much things are going on that are lousy, and that is reminding you of how much there's issues of economic oppression in the game. There's issues of systemic racism. There's issues of, because it deals with the 20th century. We can't
Yeah.
avoid 20th like the facts of 20th century history. I mean, you can wax and wane your focus on them based on table to table based on your interests,
Hmm.
but there are still these things that were very real, that existed and can factor into your game in a meaningful way, in terms of how much it's not a power fantasy. And I know some people just want to play that way, and that's totally legit. I'm not,
Yeah.
but in terms of trying to bring out the genre emulation that this is aiming for, it's just not aiming in that direction. It's just like, I
Yeah.
love Street Fighter 2. I love it. I was this one of the, like, I made all Ontario in a Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition tournament in like 93 or 94 or something. I love it, but this game is not about throwing fireballs, and this game is not about your fist lighting on fire. Uh, it's about different. No, it's about different things, right? It's about how fancy, like a fancy jump kick is, and how Bruce Lee, when he in Fist of Fury, when he goes into the Japanese dojo and takes on the whole Japanese dojo, and you're like, wow, like things can be spectacular without having to be world-ending magic like
Hmm.
superpowered stuff. Like, let's keep the stakes low, let's keep them personal, let's have it be meaningful that somebody stole your car, let's have it be meaningful that somebody's taken over your casino and is booting you out, and wants to meet you on the roof at midnight. Like I think there's lots that we can do in this space, in this design space, that whole genres of film are based around, that we can revel in and enjoy.
We haven't really seen the same level for those martial art films in recent years. And something that I think is great about the 70s to the mid 90s ish is how diverse and how many different films are coming out of a lot of different countries. And something that you kind of help use to emulate and capture those different cultures is actually the setting for this game, which is Metro City. How did you go about designing Metro City to kind of help lend to those themes of showing off old school films?
Well, I mean, Metro City was born out of, firstly, a design consideration to make the game easier to play. Because if you've got these comforts like your girlfriend Sydney and like your diner and like your whatever else, if you don't have them near you, then you can't access those comforts.
Yeah.
Similarly, you advance in training by having a stage where you can train. Like, this is the place where my heavy bag is, and my mukjong and whatever else. And you advance based on the tutelage of a teacher. And if you don't have access to those, you cannot advance the character. So everything happens within Metro City. Not everything, but most things happen within Metro City. Partly because it makes it really scary when you have to like go to Japan to get something, or when you have to like
Oh,
go off into the middle of the ocean, because you're without your support network physically and emotionally. You are literally in a strange land. Uh, no matter what the land is, like, it doesn't matter what the land is. It just matters that you're beyond the realm of Metro City. You're out of the familiar. You don't have access to your comforts. You probably can't train under your teachers, so any training that you do abroad is going to be mitigated. And it feels scary, and it feels like it feels significant doing that and going someplace. Every game, every like long running session I've run of Fight to Survive has involved people leaving the city at some point. I just wanted the GMs to be able to have something grounded, and to be able to describe these districts that are chop up the city very simply, so that the meta narrative doesn't get in the way of play.
hmm,
Because if the characters are coming up with their own comforts, those comforts are what like form the environment. That's what
yeah.
forms the basis of play. I didn't want a meta narrative trumping that. So everything in the book is designed to be a kind of springboard to action, to facilitate what's going on with the characters and their story. Metro City is basically just a cheap device to keep people within reach of their comforts, but still like having to reach outside them sometimes to go into like a scary district that they may never have gone into. Like, you guys have got to go into the Battery, it's the slums, it's the abandoned factory district. You know, there's like steam coming up from all of the sewer grates, and you've got some disenfranchised biker gangs over here, and you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it feels meaningful just traveling within the city. Thematically, it's a takeoff of a lot of old video games that were a takeoff of a lot of those martial arts films. Games like
Mhm.
Final Fight, which is a Capcom game, which took place in a metro city as well.
Yep.
Games like Fatal Fury, which took place in Southtown, and similarly had like, this person is the like martial arts king of this district, and this person is the martial arts king of this district, and you kind of frame these little tiny martial ecologies that are going on across town, which gives a really great sense of meaning to the location. And it's easy to build on that, to build on those building blocks, right? So that's why I had it take place in Metro City. I also really wanted it to be like a. I've had some interviewers kind of surprised that I'm like, you mean like a North American Hong Kong? That's so weird. And I keep having to bite my tongue because it's basically just Toronto, right?
That's what I had in mind. I'm not gonna lie, I was thinking Toronto, but I
it's
I
just
didn't
Toronto.
say anything. So yeah, it's Toronto.
Yeah. Well, even in the early 20th century, in like the 1910s and the 1920s, when the Tong Wars were raging, they were raging in San Francisco, New York, and Toronto. Right?
Mhm.
Toronto has a rich history of not so great underground martial arts
Oh
activities.
yeah.
But like, if you try to like sell the game based on the, oh yeah, and you get to adventure in Toronto, it's not as it's maybe not as sexy for our people from other countries to understand that. So it gets framed as Metro City. It gets framed as a kind of North American Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a wonderful example of a very multicultural city. Like, it was a
Mhm.
huge multicultural hub. I wanted to deal with the kind of like waves and waves of immigration that happened to North America, where the people brought their martial arts with them, how martial arts exploded after World War II, and what martial arts were already going on, et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. So,
Yeah.
but again, like, I love that history. I'm a complete nerd for it, but there's only so much a reader is going to stomach that usually. So those things come out in small ways of parsing them out. So, for instance, that chart of 50 martial arts, each of them will just have a little date in there of when they were introduced into Metro City and when they became prominent in Metro City, like when they became publicly known. Like, so that's how I'm kind of scattering a lot of the history around, is like, well, yeah, Taekwondo could have existed in Metro City like anytime after the 60s, really, but it was the 88 Seoul Olympics that made it popular. Right, so
Yeah.
it wasn't really like trying to get out this little tiny like one line. Just give me one line of space to get out these little bits of history to trick people into having a broader understanding of the martial world. Like, oh yeah, the first karate dojo was opened by Robert Trias, coming back from World War II, where he learned karate from a Chinese monk who is traveling there, and he opened it up in like, I don't know, what was it, 1952 in California.
Was it
But
really
because
that
I'm
recent?
Yeah, it was.
Oh wow.
But the well, I mean, this is the history that we have. It isn't necessarily the
Mhm.
history that's true. So who knows how many other people opened up karate studios and just didn't say anything about it, right?
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of the martial history that we do have, apparently it was Robert Trias. Um, but I get to use Metro City as a big fat excuse. So suddenly, instead of Robert Trias opening it up in California, it happens in Metro City. Instead of the Ed Parker starting the World International Karate Tournament in 1955 in, like, I forget where it was, San Francisco, I get to start it in Metro City, like, et cetera, et cetera. So we get
Mhm.
to kind of crib a lot of martial history into the one setting to make it easier as a GM, to make it more digestible as a player, and to give a profound sense of place to the location.
Yeah, kind of creating this martial arts hub then.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very long-winded explanation, but like a lot of thought went into like, let's make a city and let's fill it with interesting kind of districts that are culturally and economically distinct, and let's have them play against each other and do something really interesting with it as a location.
That's so much more than I expected, but I'm really glad to hear it. James, I think something that's really important for people to know, especially those who are listening to this on release, is that this game is currently backing for about another week at this point. So you're on Kickstarter right now. What has your experience with Kickstarter been like? I know that you said that you threw in a couple like really high reward tiers, and they kind of left you a little bit excited when they got taken. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with Kickstarter and how that's been going?
Well, the goal is $6,000 Canadian. I don't know what that is
Mhm.
American, probably something less American, but $6,000 Canadian. It's a modest goal. I'm used to traditional publishing methods and offset printing, but I chose to go with the print on demand route for
Mhm.
this, much as it broke my heart, because we're in the middle of a paper crisis and we're in the middle of an ink crisis, and I wanted the people who wanted to contribute to the game to have control over when they press the button to get it printed.
Yeah.
So this way that they could do it right away if they wanted to, or they could wait until prices calm down on printing and shipping if they wanted to, or they could, like, it puts the power into their hands, and makes it really transparent in terms of, like, this is what you're paying me to pay an artist and to pay an editor and to pay a sensitivity reader,
Yeah.
and this is what you're paying for the book, so people know exactly how these things are breaking down. So for that reason, I thought print on demand was an attractive option for this. I things are, it's pretty cheap. Like, I kept my prices pretty low because I'm selfish. I just want it. I just want this book. So it's pretty cheap. But I did include some preposterous reward tiers at $250 each, which included a make your own character for the game, like make a PC for the game that we then tout around to conventions, and those all went within the first 48 hours. So I think what I've done with this game, and it was what I set out to do, is because you can't make a game that everyone likes. A game that everyone likes is quickly forgotten. You've got to make a game that some people love. Unfortunately, and I think I've done that, given how quickly those reward tiers were gone. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
a game that some people love but not everyone likes sometimes has a hard time finding its audience. So we're at 87% funded now. We're not 100% funded. We got a week ago. We'll be funded fine. But I really want people to get involved because I really want this game to be a product of its community. I think it's wonderful that people are contributing to the player characters on the high tiers, but there's also a number of add-ons in case people want to leave their mark on the game. Like, there's this big map of Metro City that we're going to do, and I've got an add-on for naming a street, and I've got an add-on for naming a martial arts school, and I've got an add-on for naming an opponent, because there's going to be reams and reams of opponents in the back, so that the game ends up being like, the mechanics are done, the game is done, the editorial's done, but let's bring people in to contribute to the lore so that there's a lot of voices uh, adding into the game. I think that's really exciting. I think that really excites me, the idea of community involvement within the game development. And that's what the Kickstarter offers now. So if you want to be involved in the game, if you want to be a part of the game, if you even want to insert yourself into the game, now's the opportunity while the Kickstarter is still going on.
It's really exciting to me too because I've been watching this for about a little under a week now. You contacted me, I think it was, and actually we were supposed to do this interview yesterday, but as some people might be able to hear with my voice, I was not in 100% condition. So, but thankfully we're getting to do this, and I've been watching the number steadily climb. I've actually seen a lot of ads too for Fight to Survive, which is exciting and cool. So,
Oh, good. They're working. They're working.
yes,
That's what
they
that tells
are.
me.
They are. I've seen a number across various platforms. So, excited about that. I really like the sound of this game. I really like the look of it.
Well, I should mention that. I should mention the artist, because credit where credit's due. It shouldn't take me 40 minutes into an interview to gloat about Ian, but Ian McLean is
Yes.
a wonderful artist. He's been in the business. He's been specifically in the tabletop role-playing game business for 20 years.
Mhm.
And he's done art for Call of Cthulhu. He's done art for Pathfinder. He's done art for too many small indie publishing houses for me to list. He's also Canadian. So I'm Canadian, he's Canadian, and we're getting into bed with this. I'm doing the writing. I've done the writing. I've done the development. I've done the pretty much everything except he's the artist because nobody wants to see my art. So, but his art is gorgeous. It's wonderful. You can see some examples of it on the Kickstarter page. The art that we have before launch is limited because largely the Kickstarter is going to pay properly for the art, and to pay properly for editing, and to pay properly for sensitivity reading. Because if we value art and we value people being employed in the arts, we need to be able to pay them. Because too much comp work. When I'm taking a
Yep.
stance against comp work and paying people properly. So that's largely what this Kickstarter is doing. Is let's pay people properly. Let's have some gorgeous knockout martial arts art. And some of the stuff Ian's given me is just knocks my socks off. Goodness.
There was a piece that Ian did, and it's actually was the final kind of like lock into me picking up Call of Cthulhu. So yeah, he's a phenomenal artist.
Yeah, he's really great, and he's really great to work with too. So it's been a blessing for me. I've known him for years and years and years, and I just kind of was waiting for an excuse to bring him in as an artist for something, and this was particularly up his alley. He sent me screenshots last night of him watching Bloodsport, so like we're in the thick of it. In terms of like the bad martial arts movie Stockholm Syndrome that's going on, it's definitely like, yeah.
One other thing, like one final thing that's kind of going there is that there is talks of you having some expansion books and adventures for Fight to Survive. What are some of your ideas that you have so far going into it?
Well, first off the hop, I was talking earlier about my love of old kung fu movies, like
Hmm.
Shaw Brothers kung fu movies from the 70s
Yeah.
and Golden Harvest kung fu movies. That's a whole book unto itself, right? Because I only got to delve into the kind of different aspects of kung fu and Fight to Survive to a fair extent. Like I didn't get to go fully down that rabbit hole. I really want to go fully down that rabbit hole because only so many people are going to care about the difference between northern praying mantis kung fu and southern praying mantis kung fu and how they have nothing to do with each other. Like no, like the Wang Lang and Chao Gar are entirely separate, and really we've got the snap kicks. And anyway, I can keep going, but the point is, there's a lot to explore there. So I'm using each of the expansion books as a cheap excuse to explore deeper into the kind of genre emulation of different aspects of the core book. The core book gets to be a full, complete, competent game. You could play it for 100 years, but everything in it is kind of springboard, whereas I get to dive a little bit deeper into some specific influences and instances in each of the expansion books. So the Kung Fu one is one expansion book. There's also an expansion book for taking it into the 20th century, or 21st century, because I know I said no fireballs, but I kind of wanted to explore things like Van Damme's Cyborg or Don the Dragon Wilson's Future Kick, or like there's a whole streak of like post-apocalyptic Mad Maxy martial arts films that were usually low budget and wonderfully terrible, and I love them. So I'd love to go down like through those doors as well. There's also an expansion for solo play, and there's an expansion for like going just full on 80s neon kickboxing movie, like best of the best. And there's an expansion for, well, there's a whole bunch of them. I'll be releasing them later in the week. There's all kinds of, I put on in all kinds of ridiculous stretch goals, which were almost certainly never to meet. But I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm having a lot of fun with the community. I'm having a lot of fun running this Kickstarter. It's been wonderful, and I'm looking forward to getting it funded and getting the go ahead to just keep playing in that space. So yeah, there's a whole vibrant line planned between expansion books and adventures, and little tiny one-off ideas that would be great to see funded.
I'm excited to see what comes from it too. James, we are starting to run low on time here though, so I got two more pretty simple questions for you if that's all right.
Oh sure.
So, one of my favorite questions to ask on this show comes up at the end of basically every episode, and that is, what advice can you give someone looking to make their own game, but they don't really know where to start?
Oh, make it anyway, right? It's just like the advice of I want to be a writer. Okay, write. Just start writing. Like you go out and you read as much diverse content as you can. You play as much diverse content as you can, because something you're thinking of might already have been solved by someone else. And then once you have a burning, this is just speaking from my own personal creative process, once you have a burning frustration in you that one thing that you want to do is not represented at all in the industry, that the thing does not exist, then do that. And regard that, you might have to do it to an audience of no one. You just have to do it for yourself. And if you can find your audience, then that is the most amazing feeling. But do it anyway and keep doing it And so long as you feel passionately about it and you're getting something out of it, keep going. And eventually, you'll be experienced enough that people will ask you to be on design panels. And you'll turn around and say, but what do you mean? I've just been passionately plying my trade at this for years and years and years on end. Oh, wait a second. So it's just like the advice to any artist is do, draw, make, right? Just get out there and make. If you're doing development of role-playing games specifically, actually there is some specific advice. Get it to the table as fast as possible. Build up your basic idea and don't put in too many details. Get it to the table because your basic idea might be inherently flawed. It might sound great in your brain, but playtesting is the thing that will determine whether a game is good or not, whether a game is playable or not. Because you can write anything you like, but the way that people are going to play it at the table is the way the game is going to exist. So your writing about the game is not sacred. It is entirely disposable. So you should be doing most of the editorial after it has been at the table for a long time, after it has matured at the table. Then you can start codifying things. It's good to experiment. It's good to fool around. Each individual playtest group only has so much patience for how much things can change, but it just means you need to cycle through many playtest groups and do blind playtesting as well. And I know that's a lot of work. I know it takes a long time, but that's how you know if you actually have a game, is by playtesting.
Some phenomenal advice. We had other similar advice, so that's why I like that, when people are matching up on their ideas. So.
Well, anybody who's been designing for any length of time can tell you stories about how they had this great idea for a fantastic thing that was going to revolutionize the role-playing game industry, and then nobody understood it at the table.
Yeah,
and it would not click. It would not click with anyone. And the fact is, like, the way you think of things in your brain, you can try and approximate, you can try and narrow in on reality, but like the way you think of things is not necessarily how things are going to play out. And what is important is how it plays out. Games have to be a practical social experience. They can't just be a thought experiment. I mean, I guess you could just make a game that's a thought experiment, and I've seen a few role-playing games that are definitely just thought experiments. But, I mean, whether that's a valid artistic form of expression, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm qualified to say that. But for me, the real game isn't in the book. The real game is in the minds of the players, where each of it is a little bit different, and it forms a kind of bizarre brand gestalt between each of them. And that is where the real game rests, not in these pages.
Yeah, I can agree to that. I totally agree there. James, where can people find out more about you and Fight to Survive?
I have a website, radiojamesgames.com. We also have a Radio James Games Facebook page and a Radio James Games Discord, and each of them I think will link to each of the other ones. But you can go to Kickstarter. Well, the Kickstarter is still going on for Fight to Survive, role-playing martial arts meets heart. But if you do miss it, just go to radiojamesgames.com and I'll have all the information up there for you to be able to purchase it at a later time once it becomes available.
As always, audience, those links are going to be in the description down below. Go back this game. I did literally while I was talking to James. I went back this game. It was about 2 minutes before we actually started the recording, if that. I'm really excited about Fight to Survive, and I can't wait to see more come out of it. It's unique and interesting. It's something a little bit different, so I'm excited about that. James, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast this week.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. It was wonderful to be here.
And audience, thank you so much for listening. James and Fight to Survive, they're scheduled to launch really soon. Take care of yourselves. Have a good week. We'll see you on the next one. Bye. Thank you so much to James for joining me on the podcast this week. If you're listening to this within the first week of release, that's anytime before April 13th of 2022, then there's still one more week for you to go and back Fight to Survive on Kickstarter. Go check out this game. James is incredibly passionate, and from what I've seen about Fight to Survive, it's going to be really amazing. The link is going to be in the top of this episode's description. And thank you for listening, audience. I'm going to try and keep this short because if you can't tell, my voice ain't doing so hot, which makes me sound sort of peaked out during the recording and a little odd. If you like the show and you want to hear more, please leave a review or tell someone what you think. Word of mouth is the best way for us to grow. I'm still looking for more people to bring onto the show and talk about their games, so if you know somebody, please reach out to me. I'd love to have them on. So, due to this whole throat thing, there's not going to be a new episode next week, but I'm going to try and get some more interviews sorted out, and it's going to be good to go. We're going to have a fun time really soon once I'm feeling better. Take care of yourselves. I'll chat with you really soon.